Weekly Show with David J. Maloney. This week, David talks to author and speaker Clifton Taulbert and cooks with Rod and Heath from Ruth's Chris Steakhouse with this month's musical guest, Tyler Livingston and the Absolutes. Now here's your host, David J. Maloney.
Welcome to everyone at home and in our studio audience to the weekly show. I am your host, David J. Maloney, and to my right, subbing in for the Mogiles, is Tyler Livingston and the Absolutes. So Charlie Sheen has sold his Beverly Hills home for $6.6 million, which is the highest price ever paid for a crack house. And Prince Harry and his wife Meghan Markle have now permanently left the monarchy and moved to North America. They say they're actually going to work for a living. Meghan, if you didn't know, is an actress. So the other day she auditioned to play a princess on The Crown. Sadly, 300,000 chickens recently died in a fire in Michigan. It was a horrible tragedy, but it did smell delicious. Everyone goes, oh. I was watching Wheel of Fortune the other day, and they had an old farmer named McDonald on the show. He immediately bought 3 vowels. And the FCC is warning about being conned by phone scammers, now selling pretty much everything from extended car warranties to Gravity. And I'm telling you right now, if somebody calls you trying to sell you Gravity, don't fall for it. That was like a dad joke. Speaking of theft, you know, I bet magicians are probably really good at shoplifting. So we originally had a comedian booked for today's show, which is good because I can't tell jokes. But he was a Jehovah's Witness. We couldn't book him because pretty much his whole routine was knock-knock jokes. So we were trying to book Bill Withers for the show, and I told him that "ain't no sunshine" is bad grammar. And he said, I know. So if you've never seen the weekly show before, keep watching. We've got a great show lined up for you tonight. Our featured guest tonight is Clifton Taulbert. He's a Mississippi native and the acclaimed author of Once Upon a Time When We Were Colored. You don't want to miss that interview. Then we cap off the night with Ruth Chris here in Biloxi. They're with us again to cook with us right here on the show and go over some fantastic menu items. So don't go anywhere. We're going to be right back. Got all extra at the end there. I see how that went. Our featured guest tonight is a man of many talents, a local Mississippi native who grew up in the segregated South and would go on to author Once Upon a Time When We Were Colored, which is a Pulitzer Prize-nominated book. It went on to capture more hearts and minds when it was adapted into a film in 1996. He's now both an author and speaker, and the president of Fremont Corporation. We caught up with Clifton via Skype, and here's that interview. And we are here with Clifton Taulbert. So, Cliff, you were born right here in Mississippi. What was your childhood like?
Well, it was pretty typical. We grew up in an agrarian community. Cotton surrounded just about everything. That's the only world I knew up until around 16 years of age. But I guess Charles Dickens probably said it best. It was the best of times and the worst of times.
What were some of your most vivid childhood memories?
I would say the people. We were very fortunate in our community, had a great community and a lot of love, a lot of care. And perhaps even more important, there were a lot of expectations. Even though most of the older people were migrant field workers in that they went from different fields to pick or chop cotton, but they had a different dream for their children. And I will always remember that level of expectations that they showed.
Now, you lived here in such a momentous time in Mississippi history. What do you remember most about the Mississippi culture at that time, from both a good and bad standpoint?
Well, it's interesting because I lived in what we then called the colored community, which was on the backside to some degree of Glen Allen, where I was born. And that community itself was almost isolated to some degree from the challenges of racism and some of the challenges of legal segregation. Because when you are born in a world, and that's the world that has been presented to you, that's the only one you know. So you're really not spending a lot of time comparing it. Now, for relatives who lived elsewhere, they would tell us another world that existed beyond the Mississippi Delta. And sometimes you had to really stretch your imagination to believe that such a place actually existed. But I would say the expectations of the people was probably my greatest memory, and the memory that probably would be least attractive. There were so many things we couldn't do and so many places we couldn't go.
Now, so talking about what we were talking about before, you wrote much of your story into Once Upon a Time When We Were Colored. What made you decide to sit down and write that book?
Interestingly, I was in the military at the time, during the very end of the Vietnam War. And part of me, because of the fear that I had of being shipped to Vietnam, I think I was trying to say thank you to all of the people in that small community who had really stood by me, helped to raise me, and had given me the dreams that I had for myself. And so it kept me from worrying about the war. I would, at the end of the day in the military, rather than going out to get a drink or to gamble or to do something like that, I would just lock up in my barracks room and I would write. I would just let my mind drift back to what I would call a better place in better times of my life. And that became the foundation for 3 books that I would eventually write.
Now, the book was nominated for a Pulitzer Prize.
The second one was.
The second one was. Okay. Now, how did you receive the news, and what did that nomination mean to you?
Well, Once Upon a Time had become so popular literally all over the world. And it had been received as a gift from the State Department by Nelson Mandela. As a result of that, I was already aware that my writing was having impact beyond our front room. So when it came out that I had been nominated for the Pulitzer, I was excited about it. But I think if that had happened to me prior to Once Upon a Time When We Were Colored and the success that it had received, I probably would have been not only excited but dumbfounded and not even believing that it had happened. But it came on the tail end of these other things. Just a number of things happened that same year with honors and awards that none of which I had expected or anticipated.
And you were saying that the book was given by the U.S. government to Nelson Mandela. That was actually given to him as a gift on his release from prison, yeah?
That's correct. Yeah, that's correct. Absolutely.
I can't even imagine how that must have felt, because he's just such an important figure.
Yeah, he's the guy we're still waiting to see again.
Yeah.
He's just I've never had the opportunity to meet him. But I do know that several years after the book was sent to South Africa, I never heard back from anyone at the State Department whether or not it had been received. But fortunately for me, through the State Department, several attorneys came from Pretoria, ended up in Oklahoma. My wife and I hosted a dinner. One of the attorneys simply said when she walked into our home, she said, "Mr. Taulbert, we know of your work in Pretoria. The president keeps the little book on his desk." And those were the best words that I've ever heard, probably, and will always remember that.
Now, the book was then made into a movie, and Roger Ebert gave it 4 stars, which is basically his highest rating. How did the film come about, and how were you involved in the making of the film?
Well, the film came about as after the New York Times did a review of the book. They did a great review, as did the Boston Globe. And the Chicago Tribune. Those 3 reviews, I think, converged somewhere in Los Angeles. And after the Boston Review came out, we started getting calls, I did, from various people in the film industry. But eventually, it sort of narrowed down to Tim Reed, who was going into his own production company at the time, had gotten in touch with us, and we talked with him, and he said, this is something that I really think I'd like to produce. And it almost didn't happen because I eventually found the script writer who would actually write the script. He was the head script writer for Little House on the Prairie. And so he wrote the script for Once Upon a Time When We Were Colored, and it eventually became a major motion picture.
You've spoken a lot about how living in the Mississippi Delta shaped you into the man you are today. Can you walk us through that a little bit? And what about living in the Delta that helped you grow into a successful entrepreneur?
I think you've asked two questions, and
I did.
I'll try and answer them both rather succinctly. Community was very important to us, and that is the one thing that surrounded us, was good community. I mean, without community, it would have been probably impossible to live a life of expectation, of promise, and hope. So those 8 habits of the heart that I saw lived out in my presence have become the conversations that I've had the opportunity to literally hold around the world. It was the book that Sandra Day O'Connor read and invited me to address members of the United States Supreme Court. Because they turned out that people saw them as not just something that happened to a little boy in Glen Allen, Mississippi, but this little boy had encountered timeless and universal principles that were just as valid today as they were 50 years ago when they were part of my life. And of course, in that process, that was my Uncle Cleve, who owned the ice house in Glen Allen, Mississippi. And prior to working at the ice house, I was one of the field workers, as most of my family members were, going to the fields, Monday through Friday and sometimes on Saturday. But when I had the opportunity to work at the ice house and to work for someone who looked like me and someone who looked like me paid me and someone demanded everything of me, I mean, he never heard of the word excuse, I'm sure, because there were no excuses in his book. You had to achieve, you had to be successful, and more importantly, you had to be at work on time. I mean, no excuse would be good.
Now, you've created a hugely successful I'll learn how to speak, a consultancy firm with the Fremont Corporation. And I've been told your methodology has been adopted by some of the biggest companies and entities in the country. Can you tell us about the firm and what you guys do?
Well, basically, like I said, there are two things. We deal a lot with the culture. How do you build a culture whereby leadership and followership really connects in a way that brings about the vision and the mission of the organization? We tell people there are 5 things that they should think about. One is to always embrace inquisitiveness. Secondly, to accelerate your imagination. Thirdly, to question your present reality. And the fourth thing is to choose the right mindset. And the 5th thing is to embrace and brand your culture with RAY. And RAY is an acronym for respect, affirmation, and inclusion. And we look at all of these 5 things as essential elements to run a successful business and to achieve the strategic plans that you've set forth. And of course, the innovative part of that, the world has changed, technology is driving that, and everyone understands that. But when one chooses the right mindset, which has a choice between the fixed mindset and the growth mindset. The fixed mindset is fine, but what it is fixed. It sort of leaves you right where you are. And for many people, they are comfortable being where they are. But for most people, we always want to go to the next level. What's around the corner? And that's where the growth mindset will take you. But it has to be mixed with effort and determination, tenacity, and perseverance. You can't give up on yourself. That's the one lesson that we try to teach literally around the world. Never, ever give up on yourself and the dreams that you have.
Now, you've also started a coffee company that's completely owned by African Americans. It's Roots Java. Can you tell us about the company and where do you guys grow your coffee?
Well, fortunately, like us, like them, like the rest of the coffee world, we source our coffee beans from the country of Rwanda. So the Rwandan farmers, they are growing incredible coffee, and it gives us an opportunity to not only help to push forward the Rwandan story, because as you know, in 1994, the genocide that happened there almost wiped that country off the face of the earth. but now they've returned in big ways, and we're part of that. That's the great joy of that. Not only are we selling coffee, but we're also helping a country to literally continue their dream and to make significant contribution to the world's economy.
So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the world that we live in today. You've got a unique perspective, having grown up in a divided world in many ways. What lessons did you learn back then that you think maybe we all need to relearn now?
I'd go back to community. I think we have underused this very important word. Mm-hmm. We are interdependent, and even though we may not clearly understand that, but there's nothing that happens that maybe 1,000 other hands have not been involved in its creation. We are totally dependent upon each other. And I think the more we begin to embrace the idea of our interdependence and our value to each other, then perhaps the segmentation, for whatever reasons that have come about and the fear that we may have of each other, those types of things can fall to the wayside and the better part of us can come to the front.
I remember a song when I was in college, and the song was talking essentially about racism, and one of the reprisals in the song was maybe in the next world, it was talking about how when there would be less racism. And what I got from that was almost this thing like, well, if we come upon aliens from another planet, then the whole country can essentially unite in its racism against the aliens, and then that's the only way we're actually going to be on the same side, because then we'll all have somebody else to hate instead of hating each other. Which
now, I think there's probably more people caring than we realize. But here's the thing about the caring: we have to hold a conversation. We have to let the world know that we care, and that those who care not to care are not as big and their voice is not as vocal as perhaps they think it is. For those of us who believe that brotherhood and sisterhood are actionable items that we should bring to the table of our lives, then we have to do that. I have to make the decision to be this other guy, no matter what the world does around me. I know better, and I have to live better, act better, and do better.
Clifton, I really, really appreciate you being on with us today. I've really, really enjoyed this conversation. Can you kind of share with us some of the best ways for people to purchase your coffee and your books, and how they might be able to book you for a speaking engagement? Yes,
the coffee and a good book, a great combination. So rootsjava.com, that's ROOTSJAVA.com. That gets you to our retail store, which is on the website, and we ship coffee all across the country. And of course, Amazon.com sells every book I've written, and even those I'm planning on writing.
Clifton, Thank you so much for being here today. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Clifton Taulbert.
Thank you very much to the both of you as well.
And we are back with Rod and Heath with Ruth's Chris Steakhouse here at the Hard Rock Hotel and Casino, where we shoot the show. My understanding, Heath, is you are going to be cooking for us one of your appetizer staples off your menu, the Veal Osso Busco Ravioli.
Absolutely.
And I've had it, and I'll tell you, I really enjoy it. So while he's cooking this, and I understand we got a little sizzle here.
Yeah, we're going to reduce the wine by half, so I don't want to get it too hot there. I'm going to add in our barbecue butter.
Okay.
This is one of our delicious items there. It goes in with a lot of things. Great to dip your bread into. And get the
Is that the same barbecue butter that comes out when people get their bread at the beginning of a meal?
They can get it with it. This is the same barbecue butter we use for our shrimp, barbecued shrimp as well, our New Orleans style barbecued shrimp.
Last night we ate at your restaurant with the band, and one of them had that barbecue shrimp. I'm allergic to shrimp, but they had the shrimp, and everybody was raving about it.
This is a great item to get for an appetizer if you're allergic to shrimp, as am I as well. So.
Yeah, well, that's one of the reasons why I have it. So while he's doing that, tell us about some of the events. I understand you got some events coming up in April.
Yes, April 16th, we have our Cigar and Wine Dinner. We hosted our Cigar and Bourbon Dinner 2019, which was extremely successful. We partnered up with our friends at the Cigar Shop to make it a full circle, excellent event.
Oh, wow. So everybody has a little wine, a little bit of cigars, a little bit of...
And we're also highlighting Crux cigars.
Okay.
So it's going to be a lot of fun.
So you're now putting in what, spinach?
This is spinach. I've added in some veal glaze as well too. Kind of wilt down the spinach a little bit.
I've had that spinach, and it's interesting. It almost feels like it's cleaning your teeth. Why,
Right.
You know what I mean? Why does...
Or getting stuck.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, you're walking around like this. Cleaning my teeth.
So we also want to, this is our saffron-infused ravioli.
I'm just wild about
That we
saffron.
would boil it with the salted water, of course.
They call me Mellow Yellow. Now, how long does this generally take to cook?
About 2 to 3 minutes tops.
Now, can you do something like this with just a normal ravioli too, if you want to do it at home?
Absolutely, yeah. If you want to do it at home as well.
So you can just get ravioli from the local store,
Ravioli.
throw in a nice butter with and you put the butter garlic, did that have like a barbecue sauce that you mixed in with the butter?
It's got different herbs and spices that Ruth herself came up with.
Oh, wow, okay.
So yeah, absolutely. It's,
So that actually
garlic
cooked
as
pretty
well
quick.
in the butter.
That
Yeah,
actually
not too
cooked
bad.
pretty quick. Now, did you boil the ravioli first?
We did boil the ravioli
Okay.
first, salted water, give it a nice taste.
And that's usually the way you would cook most pastas, with a little salted water anyway,
Right,
yeah?
yes, absolutely. You wanna
Yeah, the
bring out that
Italian in me knew
flavor.
that.
So we're gonna put the spinach right here, and then we'll top it off with some Romano cheese. Can't go wrong there. Give it a little wipe.
It has
And
a
clean it
beautiful
up for the-
presentation.
Right.
Clean up for the presentation. Okay, so I'm the one who gets to try this because we only have one fork. So you guys are out. Okay. It is very, very good. And just like it is downstairs.
Good. Excellent.
I'm going to talk with my mouth full.
Nothing wrong with that.
One, it's good. Two, it's my show. I can do whatever the hell I want. So, and now I can clean my teeth with the...
There you go.
with that. So tell us about some of the other appetizer items you guys have on the menu while I eat high on the food chain.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a barbecued shrimp, New Orleans style barbecued shrimp. We also have a spicy Western cut shrimp, which is a cornstarch battered, delicious little hint of spice on it, a little kick to it. We've got other items, cold items, cocktail shrimp, things of that nature. So all kinds of things that Ruth's Chris to dine on.
You guys have a really good French onion soup too. I had that.
Absolutely, yeah. We've got some
I
great
really
soups,
enjoy that.
lobster bisque.
Well, thank you, gentlemen, for being here. Very, very good food.
Pleasure.
Make sure you go to the
Cigar and
Wine event,
yes.
And we will be right back. That is our show for tonight. I want to thank Clifton Taulbert for being with us, as well as Rod and Heath with Ruth's Chris. I also want to thank Josh again for hooking us up with sound with Vista Event Productions. Tyler, take us home, man.